Max Verstappen didn't just win at the Nürburgring. He dominated. Nearly a full minute ahead. Zero mistakes. Total control over one of the hardest tracks in the world. And then, hours later, that victory was erased. Completely gone. Not because of a crash. Not because of a rival. Because of 4 extra tires. That's it. 4 tires destroyed a perfect race. But here's where it gets even more insane. This wasn't caught during the race. No one noticed. No one questioned it. Until the data came in. Hidden tracking. Post-race inspection. Cold, undeniable numbers. And the moment officials saw it, there was no debate. Disqualified. Victory deleted. Results rewritten. And what this reveals about how races are really decided will completely change how you see Formula One forever. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this is much bigger than one disqualification. At first, nothing about that race felt suspicious. That's what makes this story so dangerous. Because if you watched it live, you saw perfection. Verstappen wasn't fighting for the lead. He wasn't under pressure. He was managing. And that's a completely different kind of dominance. Lap after lap, the gap kept growing. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. But steadily. The kind of pace that doesn't raise alarms. It silences them. Because when a driver looks that comfortable, people assume everything is under control. And that's exactly what happened. No one questioned the strategy. No one questioned the consistency. No one questioned why the car never seemed to struggle. And here's where things start to feel different. Because the Nürburgring doesn't allow clean races. It just doesn't. The track is too long. Too unpredictable. Too brutal on tires. Everyone struggles there. Grip drops. Performance fades. Drivers adapt. That's normal. But Verstappen's race didn't follow that pattern. The performance stayed stable. Almost flat. No visible drop-off. No clear degradation phase. And at the time, that looked like brilliance. Now, it looks like something else. Because tires are the one thing you cannot cheat in endurance racing. They define everything. Your pace. Your strategy. Your limits. And every team knows exactly how many they're allowed to use. It's not a suggestion. It's a hard cap. Tracked individually. Logged with precision. Verified after every stint. So when a car shows that level of consistency, there are only 2 possibilities. Either everything was executed perfectly, or something allowed them to avoid the usual limitations. And this is where the uncomfortable connection begins. Because having access to more tires doesn't just give you grip. It removes pressure. You don't have to extend a stint beyond the ideal window. You don't have to compromise pace to protect degradation. You can reset performance whenever you need. And over 4 hours, that changes everything. It doesn't make you faster in one moment. It makes you stronger in every moment. But here's the detail that no one realized at the time. This advantage was completely invisible. There was no radio message. No obvious clue. No visual sign. Just a car performing slightly better than expected. And in motorsport, slightly better is where the biggest differences live. Because that's where suspicion never goes. Until it's too late. And by the time anyone looked deeper, the race was already over. The celebrations had already happened. The result had already been accepted. But the truth was still hidden in the data, waiting to be discovered. And when it finally was, everything changed. And this is where everything begins to fall apart. Not on track, but in silence after the race was already over. Because once the cars returned to the paddock, the real process began. The one no one talks about. The one that decides whether a victory is real or temporary. Post-race inspection. Now here's what most people don't understand. This isn't a quick check. It's systematic. Detailed. Relentless. Every component is reviewed. Every number is verified. And in this case, officials weren't looking for something dramatic. They were looking for consistency. For alignment between what was used and what was allowed. And that's when they saw it. A number that didn't match. At first, it's just data on a screen. Nothing emotional. Nothing controversial. Just numbers. But in motorsport, numbers don't lie. And these numbers were clear. Too clear. The system showed more tire usage than permitted. Not estimated. Not assumed. Tracked. Individually. Because every tire carries an identity. A code. A record. A history tied to that specific car. So when the total exceeded the limit, there was no confusion. 24 allowed. 28 used. And in that moment, the entire race was already lost. Even if no one had announced it yet. Because here's the reality. Once that limit is broken, the advantage already exists. You can't reverse it. You can't subtract performance. You can't pretend those extra tires didn't change the race. They did. Across every stint. Across every decision. So the officials didn't need to debate. They didn't need to interpret. They just needed to confirm. And once they did, the outcome was inevitable. Disqualification. Not a penalty. Not a warning. Removal. Complete removal from the results. And here's the part that makes this even more intense. While fans were still celebrating, while highlights were being shared, while the story of a dominant victory was spreading, inside that room, the real story was already written. A document prepared. A decision finalized. And when it was finally released, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt instant. Because in one moment, the winner existed. And in the next, he didn't. Gone from the classification. As if the race had unfolded differently all along. And just like that, another team inherited victory. No overtake. No final battle. Just a silent shift. Now here's the detail that changes everything. There was no fight from the team. No appeal. No attempt to challenge the decision. They accepted it. Immediately. And that tells you something crucial. This wasn't a gray area. This wasn't open to interpretation. This was undeniable. Which leads to the question that no one can ignore. How does something so controlled go wrong? Because tire allocation isn't random. It's planned before the race. Tracked during the race. Verified after every stop. There are systems in place specifically to prevent this. Multiple layers. Multiple checks. And yet, all of them failed. Not at once. But step by step. Quietly. Until it was too late. And by the time anyone realized, the race had already been won. But never secured. Because in modern motorsport, winning isn't about crossing the line first. It's about surviving every layer of verification that comes after. And in this case, that's exactly where everything collapsed. And this is the moment where the story stops being about a mistake and starts becoming something much more uncomfortable. Because what happened here wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion, no public argument, no chaotic reaction, just silence, a quiet correction, a result that simply changed. And that's exactly why it matters. Because in modern motorsport, the biggest decisions don't happen on track. They happen in documents, in data, in systems that don't care how dominant you looked or how perfect the race felt. They only care about one thing: compliance. And here's where everything connects. Verstappen didn't lose because he was slower. He didn't lose because of strategy. He didn't lose because of pressure. He lost because the system said the performance was invalid. Think about that. You can execute a flawless race, control every variable, dominate every stint, build a gap no one can touch, and still lose everything after it's over. Not gradually, instantly. And that changes how you understand winning. Because we've been trained to believe that the checkered flag is the final moment. The finish line decides everything. But it doesn't. Not anymore. Now, it's just the beginning of the final test. Because after the race ends, the real scrutiny begins. Every tire, every component, every decision, all of it gets reviewed. And if one detail doesn't match, the entire result collapses. Not partially, completely. And here's the part that teams understand, but fans are only starting to realize. The more perfect a performance looks, the more dangerous it becomes. Because perfection attracts attention. Dominance invites inspection. And when something looks too controlled, too clean, it gets questioned. Not publicly, but internally, quietly. And that's exactly what happened here. That level of consistency, that smooth execution, it didn't just win the race. It triggered a deeper look. Because results like that demand verification. Now think about what that means for the future. Because this is not just about one team. This applies to everyone. Every car on the grid is operating on the edge. Every strategy is built around limits. And every limit is monitored. Which means something very simple. The difference between winning and losing is no longer just performance. It's precision. Operational precision. Regulatory precision. Absolute control over every hidden variable. Because if one of those fails, even slightly, you don't just lose time. You lose existence in the results. And that's the real story behind this disqualification. Not the tires. Not the number. But what it represents. A system where nothing is forgiven. Where dominance is not enough. Where perfection is required, but almost impossible to maintain. And that leads to one final thought. The next time you see a driver dominate a race, pull away from the field, make it look effortless. You might be watching something real. Or, you might be watching something that hasn't been questioned yet. Because in this sport now, the race you see, is not always the race that counts. And here's where everything comes together. Because this wasn't just a disqualification. It was a revelation. A moment that quietly exposed how fragile victory really is. Because if you strip everything back, all the speed, all the skill, all the execution, this entire story comes down to one brutal truth. Winning means nothing until the system agrees with you. Verstappen did everything right on track. Every lap was clean. Every decision was sharp. Every stint was controlled. There was no weakness. No visible mistake. If you watched that race without context, you would say it was one of the most complete performances possible. And you would be right, but only partially. Because what you saw was only half the story. The other half was invisible, hidden in numbers, locked inside systems, waiting to be verified. And when those systems finally spoke, they didn't care about the performance. They didn't care about the gap. They didn't care about how dominant it looked. They only cared about one thing: the limit. 24 allowed. 28 used. And in that moment, everything else became irrelevant. That's the part that changes how you see this. Because we tend to think of racing as something decided by drivers, by talent, by bravery, by precision under pressure. But this proves something different. Modern racing is decided by systems, by compliance, by control, by details no one can see. And those details are absolute. There is no negotiation with data, no emotional appeal, no second chance once it's confirmed. And that's why this story feels so unsettling. Because it forces you to accept something uncomfortable. That the race you celebrate might not be the race that counts. That the winner you see might not be the real winner. That everything you believe in that moment is still provisional, still fragile, still waiting to be confirmed. And here's the final layer. The part that stays with you. This wasn't a scandal. It wasn't chaos. It didn't explode across headlines with outrage. It was quiet, controlled, almost clinical.